Hello and welcome to the Ascendant Art Podcast. This is Mike with Catalytic Comics, your host, here with Vinny from Little Chad and Joey from The Keeper's Cairn. And tonight we've got one other guest. We have an additional Mike Devito, the illustrious chef. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, man.
Great,
For
great.
clarification purposes, going forward, he shall be known as DeVito, and host Mike will be Mike in order to differentiate for our listeners and for people talking to the people on the podcast.
And indeed, DeVito is the Mike that has some incredibly valuable skills because we want to talk about that. You, of course, are a chef. Tell us a little bit about just what you've done and what you do in the food context.
Yeah, I grew up in a big Italian family, so food is always part of the equation when it comes to that. And decided I wanted to be a chef. Went to the CIA. Was there for 4 years. Got a bachelor's degree. Spent a number of years in the boutique hotel, fine dining world. Stepped away from the fine dining world to start a family. So I have 3 kids now, but went to the other end of the food spectrum and worked in more institutional settings. So where I am right now is I run a food service op for a long-term care hospital. So quite the departure from the fine dining world, but it's allowed me to see all ends of the food industry.
Yeah, full spectrum for sure. And of course, because this is the Ascendant Art Podcast, I know there were some conversations we had that kind of led up to this. And the thing is, I think food is one of the other things that can indeed be reflected in art. And as we like to say here as well, that beautiful art is true. So tell us kind of what your thought is about food as art, both in your current work, but also, in that fine dining context.
Well, I don't think there's much art at all in my current work. It's very much function only. But we can get into a whole nother discussion on the industrial, institutional food world and its problems there. But going to the fine dining aspect, and I say I left it to start a family, but part of my disillusion with a lot of what the fine dining world was that it was quickly becoming, in a lot of circles, the postmodern idea of art, just with a food medium, if that makes sense. You can watch shows on Netflix now. It's was it Chef's Table. You can see a lot of this now, where food is it's not treated as something more than this medium to kind of do this weird, edgy, wild stuff that almost makes it feel like not food anymore. You don't go and have a meal. You're not satiated at the end. It doesn't have any effect on you in a primal sense, if that makes sense.
Not to be a dirty heathen, but when I see the term deconstruction involved with food, I run. I never ever want to eat at a place that ever describes their food as a deconstruction.
As you should. People, I think, have almost made food too much of what they think is "quote unquote" art in those fine dining circles, the deconstruction and foams. And I mean, you look at a guy like Wiley Dufresne. I don't know if you're familiar. He was a chef that was very popular in the early goings of like the Top Chef era, food show era. He had a restaurant, WD-50, in the city where he was doing all that molecular gastronomy stuff. And you see using agar and xanthan gum and all this kind of stuff to make good grapefruit juice caviar, these little balls of grapefruit juice that kind of look like salmon roe. And it was this weird, like, kitschy fad. There's a reason why that restaurant isn't open anymore. And I think Wiley Dufresne makes donuts now. It's like I said, it was almost like be edgy for the sake of being edgy, but there's no substance to it. Go to a place that has a 15-course tasting menu and you walk away hungry.
In a lot of ways, it reminds me of in pop culture, you get the pop stars who make their money by being edgy. Mm-hmm. And when they keep pushing the envelope, at a certain point, you can't do it anymore. And it just comes off as sad. I look at somebody like Madonna, even Lady Gaga, like the way she went full circle to be edgy was to try to then be traditional and start doing like duets with Tony Bennett. And it's this. I feel like it might be the same with like a chef. Like if you're trying to constantly be an edgelord chef, what happens once it's not the hip thing anymore. People just don't care and leave you behind.
Just move on. Yeah. But that's the thing, is the clientele that they're attracting are just looking for this new funky thing to say, oh, we ate at this place, you know.
Or we've had this experience nobody else had simply because it's new.
It's new and it's exclusive. You can't get into this place, or it's expensive. You can't, you know, it's more of an act of showing one's connections or wealth, as opposed to looking to get a meal that, you know, and not to be like cliche, but you know, that's like soul fulfilling. Because from my perspective, the most soul fulfilling meal I can have is a steak cooked over a wood fire. There's a primalness to it that you know, it connects to you on a more human level than whatever, you know, 15 types of foam could.
And I was going to say, especially on that note, with the concept of just that kind of like primal need fulfilled, it's not just that you're satiated, but also, isn't it that it's part of the experience as well, that you have a steak or you have some other nice meal, and it's also a function of the people you're having it with, the context you're having it in. Maybe tell us some about what you've seen there.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's, I mean, going back to my roots, it's, you know, yes, a big Italian family, it's all about food, but you're making these big meals surrounded by your family. You go to, you know, Christmas Eve dinner where it's every type of seafood that you can throw at people, but everyone's cooking together. So those meals have more staying power in your memory. Even a bunch of guys going camping, cooking a meal out in the middle of a field, digging a hole in the ground,
and trying to make a grate fit over said hole.
Yes,
that was a great experience
container
there.
Of scrambled eggs to cook up over an open flame.
Yep.
Not having a spatula.
And not having a spatula.
Till someone managed to find one out.
Pulling bacon out of an open fire by hand.
As it was meant to be cooked.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's like one step away from Castaway. Look, I have made bacon.
See, but that's a meal that, look, we're talking about now. You remember the details of it. How much of the details do you remember of the last restaurant you ate at?
Let's see. It was a Red Robin because my 7-year-old son, and it was his birthday dinner, and that's where he wanted to eat. And I have no idea what I actually ordered or ate. I just remember. I only remember it. It's because that's where he wanted to eat for his birthday, because he could get his. He was really into burgers right now, and that's where he wanted a burger. But it's funny. I don't remember what my wife ate. I don't remember what I ate. The only thing that made Red Robin awesome when I was big and fat was that they had bottomless fries, and I could just keep refilling. And they also had bottomless root beer floats, which is a little like menu cheat if you're really, you know, living in humid Virginia during the summer. That's a nice, you know, like for $5 you can just crush them on unlimited root beer floats. Again, I'm not fat anymore, so I don't live that life. That's old me. But anybody who is living that life can go and enjoy that if they still offer it. With inflation, who knows?
Now you're making me think about, on the Chinese side of my family, just all the different, and not just the meals, but also just the format of it too. This is everything from when all the dishes are shared, right? It has to be a group meal when it's meant for everyone to be together that way. But the other part too, of course, is dumplings, right? It seems like just a really common appetizer when you go to the restaurant, but when you actually make them in that family context, you roll out a big piece of dough and you spend like 2 hours just like stuffing these things before you start cooking them. But the whole point is, exactly, like everyone, it's meant to bring everyone together to sit there to talk, and then at the end of it, you eat it.
You're making a meal out of a family experience.
Exactly.
And that's what connects you to it, especially if it's something you've been doing for generations. I think about there's one pasta dish. My grandmother would make stuffed mussels, and she would get the mussels live, fill the sink with ice and water, wait for them to open up, pull them out and stuff them while they were still alive, and then tie them shut. And then they would cook in her tomato sauce, all tied up. And then each one, when they were done cooking, she would take them out, untie them, pull them out of their shells, and put them in the sauce. It was like mind-numbingly long process. but it got everyone involved. And, she would say that that's how her grandmother made it. So when we make it now, you're keeping this like lineage alive. And to me, there's more art in that, in my opinion, is telling a story or having a history through food that might just be within a family, but there's a cultural history to food too. That person who would tell the tribe's story, that's how the history got passed down, was there was the storyteller. I think there's a food aspect to that too. So every time we make this is keeping generations of my family alive.
That's part of an identity, and that this kind of extends beyond just the flavors themselves. And I know as part of the pre-show, this brings up another topic. But I know Joey was talking about he's got just the 4 spices. But then
the only 4 spices you need.
That's right. So that gets to the question of also there has been
oregano and
talk,
basil, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Italian has to fight for the Italian blend, right? We got rosemary, basil, oregano. What else do you need? Pepper. Okay, there you go. You can make pretty much everything.
There you go.
Okay, if you're doing something Italian, those are the big 4.
I'm just honest, like I don't, there's a reason that there's Italian restaurants more per capita, because it's American Italian. I'll clarify. American Italian food is delicious. As someone of Italian descent, and Devito is going to hate me for saying this because I'm not a big seafood fan. When I went over to Italy with my family and we did the the pilgrimage, and we were in Sicily doing the tour because I'm mainly of Sicilian descent on my mother's side. And we're getting, it's like, why is seafood like every meal? Where's the chicken? And they're like, they don't do chicken over here. Chicken's like a rare
it's a little island.
Yeah, it's a little island. You'll if you're gonna get something nice, it'll be veal. Otherwise, it'll be seafood.
Yep.
And I'm like, son of a bitch. I was like, oh.
I will say for Italian food, much like Cajun food, it is one of those good family foods, because like we do spaghetti sometimes because it's quick and easy, but when we do meatballs, that's a process.
So Devito, real quick, your family pot. Everybody who's an Italian family is going to know what I'm talking about, right? You got the big one, the one that you break out when you're making like the 3 months worth of sauce, because it's such a to-do.
Another layer of that was a wooden spoon, because
our family's wooden spoon got broke on my brother when he was misbehaving as a child, so it went away.
No, the wooden spoon is important. There's only so much truth to this, but the idea was that the wooden spoon adds flavor. It's like seasoning a cast iron. It's porous, and it sits in the tomato sauce all day, and you just stir it every now and then. But you'd only wash it with hot water. That's it, and you set it aside. And the idea was that the wooden spoon that's the secret sauce when you're making a good tomato sauce. That's the one wooden spoon that you use, because it just keeps building on flavor
year after year.
There's only so much reality to it. But
unless you got another Italian older brother running around doing the wrong thing at around age 7 or 8, and mom is trying to keep you out of the kitchen, and then bam, heirloom wooden spoon is gone. And
see, that's with my grandmother. That's
Shattered.
What shoes were for. We got hit with the shoes.
I think she was using what was on hand at the moment, because he was doing something bad. So.
Getting back to the whole modern food thing, it's really hard to tell those stories. It's really hard to have those experiences in this weird, superficial, it's all about what kind of edgelord chef I can be.
Or like, what's the latest and most exotic ingredient I can find, right?
Right, that have no worldly connection to where you are. You said weird exotic ingredients in the middle of Chicago. How does that tie you to where you are?
Yeah, I hope this
Where's the history
avocado
in
trend
that?
passes soon, because I hate avocado.
I think you just have to look at it and say, avocado, no. There you go.
Yeah.
Proper dad joke.
And speaking of exotic and yet somehow terrible ingredients too. Yeah, we can also talk a little bit about industrial food, I think, because I've got kind of a connection here that when I studied chemical engineering, I remember one thing I did not realize when I first got into it is that the food industry is one of the biggest employers of chemical engineers, along with pharmaceuticals and oil. And of course, I was studying renewables.
Yeah, make this shit taste like this shit. We'll pay you.
It's almost like make this shit addictive to the human palate.
Well, then I'll just keep adding sugar by way of high fructose corn syrup. Problem solved. I want my check.
Yep. But when you combine that with a lot of sodium, high volumes of sugar and salt basically rewire you to make.
By the way,
more of
McDonald's
that.
hack for people who still eat that crap. Always ask for no salt on the fries, because the fries are still going to have a gargantuan amount of salt from the way they're processed. But if you make from them do it no salt, it'll have to be fresh and hot, because if you've ever seen people in McDonald's, they pour just epic amounts of salt right on the batches right after they come out. So when you say no salt, it's like, oh no, I better make a batch, and it'll always be hot and fresh. That was a lot better in about 25 years ago when the fries were really good, because they fried it in like beef tallow.
Yes.
Yes. But now it's all the vegetable oils, because that was one of the things we learned is we have these programs to subsidize corn, and we grow so much corn that we can't eat all the sweet corn. So like, okay, we're going to have grain-fed meat. We're going to feed the animals with it. And it's like, well, now we grow more corn than that. It's like, well, okay, now how about ethanol? We're just going to set it on fire. And we set like 40% of that corn grown on fire through ethanol. But yeah, like it was one of the programs is because the corn is so cheap, you create all of these like corn oil products. And it's weird. It's like this is a little bit different view of food. That instead of trying to like create or deconstruct food, we're going to turn food into this like calculation to say what is the cheapest possible way we can make something that tastes acceptable.
So it was you assholes that ruined KFC.
The chemical engineers is what he's
the chemical engineer, yeah.
Yeah, because wasn't the original KFC recipe like 120 spices, and then like even Colonel Sanders was all pissed off about it because they knocked the number down to like 38.
I was going to say, now that I don't know.
No, Colonel Sanders, you're wrong.
But I do know there's a great documentary called Fathead that does cover the transition away from beef tallow and into all of these like corn and soy oils. I also know too, like I stopped eating all that after studying how it was made, because you can't squeeze a corn kernel or soybean oil or soybean and get oil out of them. You actually have to chemically extract it. And that's when you realize like, man, that's just, it's not natural, dude.
If you look at how canola oil is made, there is no such thing as canola. It's rapeseed oil, but that does not have a very marketable name to it. But the amount of stuff that has to be done to it to become the product you see on the shelf is overwhelming.
Yeah, my favorite's the Afex. So that's you super pressurize with ammonia, and then you decompress, and then at that point it literally explodes, and that's how you prep it for the extraction phase.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you have to actually treat it with a gasoline solvent. Yeah, some type of solvent it has to be treated with, and then you have to deodorize it because it smells so rancid.
Yep.
And what else do you have to do to make it clear? Because it's
then the clarifying,
like that. Yeah. So there's a million steps to the process, and people think, oh, vegetable oil, it just comes from vegetables. It's okay.
This segment of the podcast is brought to you by extra virgin olive oil, which actually comes from squeezing olives.
Not to mention beef tallow, where I get like a nice piece of brisket and then cut that layer of fat off.
DeVito, if there was a restaurant, would it be that hard to actually make your fried products with beef tallow today? Like, is it actually because I'd like to get, I wanted to get that answer. Like, is that something where sometimes you find out that the industrialization of an industry has basically made it untenable to continue like an old way?
Yes and no. If you're shooting for a high volume type of restaurant, it's going to be hard. There's a lot of things that you'll have to do to make sure that it's sustainable. You're going through enough product to have enough fat remaining. That also depends on how much frying you plan on doing. No, it wouldn't be hard if you're a smaller restaurant serving smaller number of people. You're going for low volume, high quality. How, in my opinion, most restaurants should be, because then you're dealing with a small local place dealing with local foods. You have a network with local farmers, and you can tell a story that way. There's a lot of very, 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 very good restaurants out there who do that. That has a lot more meaning behind it. They can make great food, but they're telling a story about the area they're from, in a way. To go back to being able to like use beef tallow and lard and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, it's been that way for hundreds of years. Being able to serve food to people is you have to use every last bit. I do that all the time. I actually was just posting a Twitter thread the other day about I had a strip roast and I took the cap off and I rendered it all down, and I've been cooking with that for the past couple weeks now. I still turn the strip into steaks, and yeah, it's especially the way things are going. I think it's becoming more and more important to relearn those old techniques, learning how to utilize every bit of the food, and that includes the fat, and turn it into usable product. Canning and preserving, smoking, drying, curing, all that stuff is.
So here's one that I found out about recently, because I moved out towards the country here in Winchester, Virginia, and there's something called like egg glassing, and I'm sure maybe you've heard of it, DeVito, where you can, because it only works if you get like farm eggs that haven't been treated in the industrial process. But you can basically, I have to look up what the process is, but you can seal up an egg and keep it in a jar, and it'll keep for like 2-3 years with the process. And it's an old way of doing it, so that's how you could basically create a stock of food you could have again in the wintertime when things aren't as abundant and all that kind of good stuff. And I had no idea this was even possible, but it will not work on industrialized processed eggs, even organic ones, because they're all washed and processed.
Because they're washed.
And it takes out the part of the shell that will actually allow this thing to work and seal it and keep it good to eat for years.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. That's done with lime, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's like it's basically like a chemical sealant on the egg, and it's the equivalent of old timey natural vacuum sealing the egg chemically. So,
yep.
And you don't have to keep it in a fridge. It can be in a jar,
right.
And it's cool. I was like, this is amazing. How did I never know about this before? And it's because you can go to the grocery store and just buy eggs. So why would they even bother learning it?
Right. Well, that's so much of what food is to us historically has been unlearned in the advent of modern factory farming and all of these chemical engineering stuff that you mentioned before, that it makes it so that we don't have to know how to keep our food through winter, and we don't know how what do we do with the extra cabbage that we grew, is learning how to dry food, learning how to make pemmican, stuff like that stuff to me has a lot more meaning.
Exactly. And also like developing a lifestyle around that as well, that you get your whole family involved or you get friends involved. And the process of making it is itself also a relationship building tool on top of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about Italian food before. That's what the origins of tomato sauce. Tomatoes are not native to Europe. They were from South America, and they were brought over, and they were originally thought to be poisonous. Because the original tomatoes were very highly acidic, and the wealthy still had their tableware made out of pewter and shit like that. So acidic foods pulled out the lead. You get lead poisoning, you thought it was the tomato that was poisonous. So the people who ate tomatoes were primarily the poor. But in order for them to not taste horrendous, they had to cook them down. That's where tomato sauce originally comes from. Is you get rid of the skins, get rid of the seeds, cook the pulp down, you jar it, store it. And in southern Italy, that's a family event. Get all the ripe tomatoes, run them through the mill, start simmering them, and get them in there and get them in the jars. You definitely get your year's worth of sauce in one big production day.
Yes, indeed. Or I'm also thinking,
or if you've got old Italian relatives, they'll have their tomatoes grown in their garden.
Yep.
And my gosh, the pride an old Italian guy is going to have in his garden is never matched by, like, you can talk to him about his son who went to Harvard, whatever, he went to school. What about your tomatoes? Oh, let me tell you about the tomatoes.
Or the cellar wine.
Or the cellar wine. Or like, they'll have gardens like I got one guy who's like, I got fig trees. I brought the fig trees from Sicily. I planted them. I've moved them. And it's just like in an epic hour conversation just about the fig trees. What about your son who's like head of cardiology or whatever? He's a doctor. But the figs. Let me tell you about the figs. And then, he gave me a cutting and for my house to plant your fig tree now, Vinny. And I'm like, okay. And every time he sees me, the first thing out of his mouth, how those figs doing, huh? And how they doing? I was like, they're doing fine. They're doing fine. To me, and maybe I don't know if it's the Italian in me or whatever, but to me, that's
something like that is cool as shit because to think about, because you're like, all right, I have a fig tree in my yard now. I can trace this tree directly back to Sicily. How cool is that? And how old is that tree that it came from in Sicily? How many generations has that tree been around for? And so every time you make a fig jam or just eat a fresh fig off the tree, you can kind of feel that history in it.
That reminds me of one interesting piece of Chinese food culture. So, like, one of the ancient capitals of China was Xi'an. A lot of empires were founded there. And Xi'an's most known for the pomegranate, but the funny thing is, pomegranates also are not native to China at all. But that was actually during the Han Dynasty. Apparently, there was trade between the Han Chinese and the Romans. They just barely knew each other through these border countries. And whenever we go to that part of the country, though, like, everything is based on the pomegranate. It's interesting to say, like, hey, man, like, here's, like, literally the world's first global trade network where these people had to carry these things across the mountains, across Central Asia to get them here. And like it's completely changed the city and its whole identity.
Yeah, I mean, but that had a lot of meaning then. Now you can get a pomegranate wherever, and you don't think about, well, where did the pomegranate come from, and not just that particular pomegranate, but originally. You put saffron in your rice, and saffron's just a spice. It's just another thing to have. The meaning of it gets lost. Digging through that, like, I look at food as history more than I look at food as art.
Yeah,
and being able to make those connections gives the food some meaning.
Yeah, but I think also too to think of food as art in that context, right? That in the same way that artwork can communicate something about the artist and their influences, it seems too that in the same way with certain food styles, that it's not just that this is a particular tomato sauce that tastes good. It's that you're right, like it's the sum of the work of these families and the sum of these like times together, right, all coming into one moment. Or in a similar way, right, dumplings taste pretty much the same everywhere, but it's when you think of it as like, either at our church or when we see our family and like everyone's just sitting around the table together making these together. I mean, I met my wife that way. It carries a different meaning, right, when you do that.
Yeah, it's I guess, you can make the case that history aspect, whether it's personal history, whether it's cultural history, whether it's familial lineage, I guess therein lies the art of it. But it always ends up being something bigger than yourself. And I think that's where you find art of any medium has its meaning, is when it means something greater than maybe just the individual artist, or certainly just the individual. And this is just maybe my opinion, but where it has a greater meaning than the individual and transcends. I make those mussels on Christmas Eve, and it's not about me and my experiences making the mussels. It's more about my grandmother's grandmother that I feel like I'm keeping alive by making those.
And now with this in mind, because again, you've worked the whole spectrum of this industry. Let's imagine that we've got some people on here who are listening who might be students thinking about going into that field. What are things like people really should be trying to learn and teach themselves? Because I know it's not like how to make the craziest new foam.
And I mean, once you've made a foam, you've pretty much made every single foam there is. Yeah, I don't know. Like when I was at the CIA, I got my bachelor's there. So the second half of your bachelor's degree is like 20% kitchen work, and it's almost like a second half of it's more like a business degree. And you see, I would, even just in that time, I'd see, some of the newer kids coming in. I feel like they were motivated to become chefs by watching Food Network. They were so excited to become the next Thomas Keller that they didn't really care about A, fundamental skills, and B, like I said, the meaning of their food and what makes them love food. I think they were more into the hypothetical glitz and glamour of what a chef was portrayed at or is portrayed as on TV. The artistry isn't in making something that's cutting edge. It's more about refining the techniques that have been passed down through generations, turning those into something more. That and regaining more of a truer connection to food that's been lost. So it might be out of necessity, but I think it can be also out of appreciation for history.
So
that's it.
let's we'll spin that off into a fun kind of side note then.
Fair enough.
If you were gonna go and now get out of like the industrial food business and
Yeah.
we're running your own, and it's gonna just assume it'll be successful, whichever thing it would be. Because that's all, like sometimes we have to make choices based on what pays the mortgage and not what we'd want to do.
Sure.
Would it be running your own kind of like farm to table restaurant? Would it be doing some kind of regional food training kind of system? Like, what's the thing Devito wants to do if he can just do what he wants and it's going to be successful?
Yeah, I'd be leaning towards the farm to table aspect, small restaurant.
Oh, we know you've been thinking about it. So come on, tell us what's the thing that you'd want to do. I know that it's probably everybody's kicks around what they'd want to do if they if it was just going to work. So I know that a guy who's a chef of your caliber knows what he would want to do. Don't play it off. Go ahead and tell us what it is.
Fine. No, I'd be wanting to start my own farm, have my own meat that I butcher, and turn it into a very, very small butcher / restaurant. Really maintain the connection to the land with the meat and whatever I'm growing or trying to grow, and tie that all in with like I said, I'm very big into cooking by fire, and I don't mean like gas grill or anything. I mean like digging a hole, making a fire, and cooking over it. And old world like preservation, so curing, smoking, drying.
I was gonna say, and then it sounds like the restaurant side, like it kind of gives people a chance to like get down in there with you and just like experience what you're making.
Yeah, and having an outlet like that. And you mentioned like some kind of like regional training or something like that. I feel like every kitchen is also a classroom, not just for me to teach people who would want to learn and be involved in that kind of stuff, but it's always an opportunity for me to learn new things too. I've learned new recipes and dishes and food history, even working in the hospital that I'm in. Have a couple guys that started out as dishwashers and have trained up into cooks, and they would tell me about their family recipes and history. And a lot of the guys in my kitchen are from Haiti, and I learned about Haitian food. I didn't know anything about it, and they would teach me, what all the stuff that they would make. Black rice, which is like this mushroomy rice dish, or chumu, which is like a stew that you make on their Independence Day, which I think it's either New Year's Day or right before New Year's Day. But just new things and where they come from, and learning about that kind of stuff to me. So it's always an opportunity to learn new things in all directions. And I feel like every kitchen is like that, or every good kitchen is like that.
There's an interesting one from the Midwest that a lot of people don't know about in the rest of the country, and that's morels.
Morels? Oh, they're everywhere. Yeah, they're in the
morels. Yeah, they only grow for about 2 weeks out of the year, and they're a delicacy. You can sell them for like $26 a pound.
Yeah, they're a very beginner-friendly foraging mushroom because there's not a whole lot of poisonous lookalikes.
Yeah, and I mean, they're impossible to miss. I mean,
right.
Grab the thing that looks like a shriveled dick that's sticking up out of the ground. That's basically what a morel looks like. But
Joey, I don't think I need to hear about why you decided to start doing that in the first place.
I wouldn't put that as a good descriptor, because you can also stumble across stinkhorn mushrooms, which kind of look like exactly what you described.
Wait. Did you just say the name of them is stinkhorn mushrooms?
They don't look the same.
Oh, okay.
The morels do not look like stinkhorns, but both morels and stinkhorns look like dicks growing out of the ground. Yes.
But everybody should remember that Finkel is Einhorn.
Yes.
Einhorn is Finkel, and you don't want either of those either.
Stinkhorn is Finkel.
Right. That could be a chef meme right there. I made one. That'll be good. It'll get to 25 people.
Stinkhorns also earn their name. They smell. They're edible, but they smell. But
that
Google,
could be said
just,
by a
just
lot
Google
of
it. Just Google a picture of a stinkhorn, and you'll see exactly what I mean.
But it's, like for like family tradition, that was a big tradition for us.
Is morel hunting in the spring?
Yes,
right?
Spring every year. Like,
yep.
Let's go find those dead elms and dead oaks, because we're gonna get us some morels. And
oh yeah, and they're fantastic.
You soak them in salt water because they're full of bugs and shit. And after that's done, you bread them and you fry them, and they're delicious.
there's a million ways you get it.
I mean, you guys do that, but around where I live now, everybody just tries to find where they can get some pawpaws off the pawpaw trees. That's
pawpaws,
what.
yeah.
And if you try to like get somebody to give up there, they nope. That they protect it, and they'll run you off the mountain if you try to take someone's pawpaws.
There's a lot of ways you can get run off a mountain up there. You got to be careful.
Or collect taxes. That's another good way to to get in trouble.
I was gonna say that is a great Southern song right there, Copperhead Road. A little bit different kind of cooking for that though.
So, Devito, I did want to. This is a kind of an interesting question to kind of dovetail off this, which is because you mentioned that you work in the kind of the hospital setting and you're cooking at like scale is what you probably are working on every day, is just scale level. Like we've got to mass produce stuff to feed hundreds of people. How is it? Yeah, thousands of people. As a chef who's trained to take such pride in like making the food and doing all that stuff, how complicated is it for you to feel pride in the work you're doing when it's because there's got to be a give and take, right? You can't, by necessity, you can't put the time and love and effort into thousands of meals that you can put into maybe 5 to 10 people's servings.
So for me, it's more about my staff in that sense. The pride isn't in the food necessarily. I want to make sure that we're putting out the best food we can put out, given the circumstances and the volume. Part of that is also obviously maintaining a budget, a very tight budget. It seems odd when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of people that the budget can be so tight. So for me, it's more about teaching the staff as much as I can and building them up wherever I can, so like their success is my success in that sense. So getting guys who've never worked in a kitchen before, a lot of the guys have language barriers, trying to build them into something. And that's always a two-way street, obviously. A lot of these guys who start out, no culinary skill set, but are some of the hardest working dudes you'll ever meet. They'll work 7 days a week, night and day, all day. I don't know how they get the energy that they do. And they're always like, okay, can I get more hours? Can I get more hours? But being able to at least stuff that I've learned and being able to like help them build a career for themselves, build them up into sous chefs and beyond, and seeing them grow is what I take pride in. A lot of them are looking for the American dream, and all I ask is the work ethic and the effort, wanting to improve and do better, and being able to turn chefs out of a hospital kitchen who had no food experience before.
Yeah, man, that's quite an accomplishment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where I spend most of my efforts. Teach whatever I've learned and in whatever capacity I can to my team, and give them the credit for when people are happy with their meals and stuff like that. It's not about, for lack of a better term, glory. I want to give it to them, and they feel pride in their work, and they're getting to learn that feeling of having a little bit of meaning into the food that they make. Being able to cultivate that pride for them is a cool thing to see.
I think that's an awesome way, because it seems like, in just kind of getting to what to summarize what I'm getting from this conversation, the elements of cooking that are the most vital for you are kind of like the community aspect, the
human
bonding,
element,
the human element. So it would make a lot of sense that the thing that you're still able to, take a lot of pride and satisfaction in is the fact that on a human level, you're helping these people to learn skills that they didn't have before, get better at things that they didn't even know they could do. And that's such an awesome way to do it. I think, this is an interesting kind of conversation, because we've talked with some people about art as a, in general, right? Mm-hmm. And there's an element of tradition versus the modern, and how this like modern, and we've talked about it here today with the food part, where it's the edge chef, the modern deconstructionist stuff doesn't really take a fundamental understanding or knowledge or workmanship aspect to it.
And I do think that it's also self-centered by nature. It's about me, the artist. Whereas, I think that we said like the tradition versus the modern. The tradition is not about the individual in that sense.
Yeah. So what
you're
it
not
reminds
trying to
me
create
of,
the. I'll pass back to you, but yeah, because what it reminds me of also is when you said that it's a fundamentally selfish thing. That in the deconstructionist sense, it's like I have to create something that undermines everybody else. And you're in that is a reflection of yourself. Whereas tradition is, I'm simply lifting up something that has already been handled by so many before and by so many after me. And you're right. There is something fundamentally different just by the design of those two ways. And yeah, sorry, Finney, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, so what I was going to talk about it in the art world, like we've talked to some people where in the art community, you have to, like, if you're going to be a traditional artist, you learn about the different, schools of art, you learn about aesthetics, you learn about classical, form and and you build those building blocks become how you can be an expressionist who still makes amazing art and things like that, as opposed to a, person who tapes a banana to a canvas and and gets all this attention, or and I think Devito is right, man. These new chef people, they're just trying to get their 15 minutes of fame. Whereas if you go to and I've been around where I've grown up and my the Italian communities things, there's the restaurants where the mom and dad have owned it for 30, 40 years, and your whole generations of families have gone, and now the younger generations coming in and taking over, and it's not that they're making, like, the new generation isn't coming in and deciding to make a deconstruction of chicken parmesan, right? They're gonna make the chicken parmesan. They might make it a little different in their new way, but it's still going to be based on trying to make you as the customer enjoy the food and have a great experience that ties back to what you've been going and getting for years at this restaurant. And I don't think that these other guys are doing that, and that's why I don't think they last.
Yeah, I mean, that's why is chicken parm around? It's still around forever.
Because it's delicious.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. But like you said, it's like, all right, it's like, my grandmother made it this way, or my uncle made it that way, or whatever, and like that's what you remember about it. This chicken parm is pretty simple and basic, but why is it around? Is because
it's Italian American peasant food is what it is.
Right. There's not as much of that cultural history to it, but it connects you to your family.
Yeah, because Italian style chicken cutlets, it was a mainstay for my family here, and I was real upset when I was in Sicily and they tried to give me like veal cutlets. I was like, I want chicken.
Okay. While you were in Sicily, did you ever have cardone?
Yeah, it was good stuff.
Celery that looks like it's from Mars.
Yes,
it's not really. It's not really. I think it's actually same family as artichoke, but
there was a couple of things that were epically awesome in Sicily. There was some of that like that. I got some lamb that was on a side of the road, like smoker, kind of like basically what you get down here in the South with guys just smoking barbecue and they sell it. And these guys were grilling up some lamb, and it was like amazing. It's like I still wish I could figure out how they did it exactly so I could make it here.
Yeah. I can't speak to the lamb dude, but you just reminded me. That was like so much of my childhood was I grew up in a Methodist church, and that was for charity fundraisers. You're right. We would just like set up with this like stack of cinder blocks, throw a bunch of like hickory wood in it, and just like smoke chickens all day. And people would just line up with their cars, pick one up to go home.
Cooking things over fires just tastes good. I mean, that's
it just tastes like
it does.
It tastes good. There's, like I said, there's that like ancestral primal instinct to like cook over fire that just it gets satiated every time you do have some food that maybe that's why it tastes so good inherently, is that it's it strikes a chord that's
it unlocks
way
a genetic memory.
Yes,
that genetic memory thing, man. You got stuff that's in your DNA that you just know is how it's something's supposed to be. And when you get some when you get grilled meat cooked over a fire, it's just something about it. I what's that official like fancy food critic term, like umami or some weird name?
Umami is like is
the savory
flavor profile. Yeah.
Well, regular people just call it good, and that's what it is.
Of course, as we're talking about this, Vinny, this reminds me too about like just basic primal understandings. It's like you've got to be programmed for years in college to believe that like that chemical engineered like soy product is absolutely food because it has the ingredients that make it taste like meat. When really we're just looking for something where the only ingredient is steak.
Isn't it funny how the people who don't want you to eat meat want their stuff to look and taste and smell exactly like meat? To me, that's
All right.
that's like
So-
the epitome of irony right there.
So I'm gonna share that.
I'm a vegan, but I want
I
my
want the
vegan
vegan-
sausage to look exactly and taste exactly like that Italian
And have you
sausage.
ever you talk to the vegan people? Like I've had people come to my cookouts and they bring their vegan artificial stuff and they go, "You should try it. It tastes so much like meat." And I was like, "No, I have steak. It tastes like steak, and that's
The only ingredient is steak.
Like, shameless plug for Lil Chad right there.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
But what I'm going to tell you, my favorite story to sum up why soy products are terrible. I worked at a movie theater for almost a decade, from when I was in high school through working through college. And for people who don't know, the butter that you get at a movie theater is not butter. It is an artificial soy-based buttery topping. And when you need to refill the butter warmers for people to put butter on their popcorn, when you get the container, it comes in a big yellow container, and you open the cap, and it's got that little seal on it. And when you look at it, I feel like this is what cholesterol must actually look like in the real world, because it's this yellow, cakey, gelatinous substance, and it looks unappetizing. No, it's terrible, and you have to squeeze that container to actually get it to come out, because at room temperature it is not liquid. It will not be liquid, and you have to put it in the warmer, and it has to sit in the warmer for like 25 minutes to get warm enough to look like butter. And I'm just like, I never wanted butter on my popcorn again once I refilled that. And I just look at people like glocking it on there, and I was like, oh my God, you have no idea, man. You don't even know what you're putting on that stuff, man.
Well,
it's like like, it's like Aliens, man. It's like, game over, man. Game over. It's terrible, man. Don't do it. And that's
like
what all these
ice
products
cream.
are.
People don't realize soft serve ice cream is a powder.
Yeah, and then you make it into a slurry, because I used to work fast food many years ago, and yeah, like you it's this bag of substance you put into the machine, and I'm like, man, like I can't eat this anymore.
Yeah, I don't know how people do Velveeta to make mac and cheese.
I hate Velveeta.
Dude, you look at Velveeta and you're like, it's not food. It doesn't look like food. It doesn't look like anything.
As a 100% white French person, I can say wholeheartedly, if you try to put Velveeta in front of me and tell me it's cheese, I will know it's not cheese. I don't know what it is, but that has neither the taste nor the consistency of any real cheese ever.
Yeah,
you might as well make a meal from Spam and Velveeta.
But it was born out of the chemical era, the era of better living through chemistry, where people really thought, like, we're going to solve hunger.
George Jetson would order his meal in a pill.
And people thought that was the future. And what I'm getting out of this podcast is, it's a saying I've heard before: nothing dates the past like its perception of the future. And that whole way of thinking, just like our molecular gastronomer earlier, needs to just go back to like selling donuts or something.
Yeah, he's probably a hell of a lot happier.
Is he making cronuts though to be edgy? Weren't those the big thing for like 2 months? Cronuts, croissant donuts.
Croissant donut. I was gonna say, I'm not even familiar with the term.
I mean, I like croissants.
Yeah, it's
if they're made with butter, I mean, it's good.
Butter makes everything delicious.
I was gonna say, true. Dude,
after I gotta ask the chef. This is
go for it.
Okay, go for it.
There is a dairy product to make any food better, unless it is a dairy product. Because there's going to be a cheese that will complement it, or there will be a dessert with ice cream. Dairy. There's always a dairy product to complement the food, unless it's dairy based already.
I'm not much of the reason why I didn't go into baking and pastry. I'm not much of a sweets guy, but I would say on the cheese front, I think you got a point there for sure.
Good. I'm going to tell my wife I'll finally win one.
And butter. Yeah. I use a lot of butter.
We all agree on the meat front that turkey needs to stay in its fucking lane and stop trying to be everything else.
Yeah,
just shut up about turkey, man. Turkey's delicious.
I love turkey
as turkey,
but I don't need turkey bacon. I don't need turkey pepperoni. I don't need turkey steaks. I don't need turkey burgers.
I will defend turkey. I'm going to defend turkey bacon, because you can get at least when you're trying to feed like a kid, you can get an easier time. It's easier for you as the parent cooking it and getting it to the right like crisp consistency and not burnt, because it's totally processed.
You can't burn real bacon.
It's just
you can.
Easy. I'll tell you what. Easiest way to make bake. I make it for my kids all the time, and they love it. Is you just get a roasting rack on a sheet tray. One of those. It's got a lot of wire to it. It's like a little wire rack that sits right above it.
Wire rack over
Yeah,
a
for
pan,
the roasting
right?
pan. Yeah.
Yeah. Oven, literally just lay out the strips. Oven 350. They'll get crispy. They won't burn. They'll dry out so they get crispy. But the fact that you get air circulation all throughout, so it doesn't sit in the grease, that's where you get those bits that are some are crisp and some are soggy. So just bake them on a wire rack. That's it. Done.
If nothing else, this podcast, this is going to be the most beneficial thing probably of all the conversations we've had so far.
Well, here's the cool thing
knowing
about
how
it.
not to destroy bacon when I'm dealing with a 7-year-old.
Oh yeah. So yeah, put them on a wire rack, sheet underneath. You bake them at 350 basically until they're crispy, and all of the grease, you just pour that off through a little filter, and you have all that bacon fat that you can use to cook your eggs. And cook
I was gonna say, save the grease.
Oh yeah.
You got to save the grease.
I was gonna say, man, we do a lot of like pork belly at our house, and that's exactly it. Yeah, you go back, you make eggs with that, you make other stuff with that. And it's interesting because like we don't really bake anything, but when you cook in the right fats, like your kitchen almost smells like a bakery. If you ever notice that, because that's the other thing too, is like when you're cooking with good fats, like it smells good. Like for some reason, canola oil just smells awful when you cook with it.
And it's been treated to that's like the best it can smell, because it's actually been treated to not smell even shittier. But yeah, I mean, baking was traditionally done with like lard. Pie doughs were made with lard and tallow and stuff like that. So that's not an outlandish concept.
All right, top fats to work with. Is it bacon? Is it ghee? Like what's the best ones for just everyday use in different circumstances?
My answer to that is yes. Use them all.
There you go.
Tallow, lard, the term ghee is clarified butter. It's basically you melt butter at low heat so that because butter is just an emulsion of fat, water, and proteins, the milk proteins that are still in it. So if you melt it at a low heat and just keep it at a low heat, all that stuff will start to separate. The fat will stay on the top. You'll see like little globules of water down at the bottom of your pan. And then all the proteins will, over time, either settle to the bottom or form like a little foam on top. You skim the foam off the top and you pour off the clear fat, and that's essentially ghee, clarified butter. You don't have to pay through the nose to buy a little jar of pre-clarified butter. You can just make it yourself, and that's what you want to do. But the purposes of using ghee is for high temperature cooking. So you want to clarify butter, you can sear things at a much higher temperature without burning it, because the stuff that burns are those proteins that are floating around in it. So if you ever make eggs in the morning with just regular butter, you see those brown bits forming. Those are the milk proteins just starting to caramelize, which is great if you're doing brown butter. It can be a really good flavor to add if you want to do that. But if you're going for high heat cooking, clarified butter will get rid of all that, and now the smoke point of your fat is way higher. That's why I say yes. There's a lot of good applications for all of those fats.
Awesome. That's perfect, because that way I can use them all.
Oh yeah. Bacon. If you want the bacon flavor, you use your bacon fat. Tallow makes for a very good high heat cooking. Tallow and lard are great for making baked goods with, or just searing your steak in. You can finish with a little bit of whole butter to get that flavor in. That's what I usually do. Is if I'm searing a steak, I'm starting with tallow or lard or clarified butter in the pan, because that's going to be the vast majority of my cooking time in the higher heat, so it doesn't burn. But then I'll add whole butter in at the end for that layer of flavor. If I add it too early, that's all going to burn. Those proteins will burn.
We're getting towards the end, so I have to add one callback question. Have you ever watched an anime called Food Wars?
No.
All right. Then there we go.
It's funny. I know that you guys mainly talk, like you said, like pop art. And, I've never read a comic book. I've never watched an anime. I guess.
Well, you had
I
time
should-
like
do I
learning
guess
real
this is-
skills.
That's right.
I guess I should start if there's some good ones out
Well,
there.
whatever. Okay, Food Wars taught me a lot about cooking.
I would. All right, so we need.
I'm
to
gonna have to look this up. Food Wars.
It's on
Okay.
Netflix. You can get the first few seasons on Netflix. It's also on Hulu. Basically, any streaming service. It's on like YouTube, I think. I would love to get him to watch like the first season and just get an actual chef's opinion on Food Wars, and then and to see how is it something is the food stuff that they talk about actually true, because I feel like they talk about it with such authority that it sounds like it would be, and I want to believe it's true, but I don't know for sure since it's just anime people making a cartoon.
I'll have to look it up, and I can do a little follow up with you.
All right, just don't. You got little
fiction,
kids, so
fact.
don't watch it around the little kids. It's got a couple bits of fan service that are not like terrible, but might be awkward around children.
Yes.
Oh.
Have
Okay.
you ever made a meal that blew somebody's clothes off? It was so good.
That's apparently the premise.
So I'm
of this
assuming
show.
that's in the show.
Frequently.
Oh my god.
I mean, the main character's a really good cook, so he blows
Yeah.
a lot of girls' clothes off when
All
they
right.
eat his food.
I'll have to learn that technique then.
Only for your wife.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, there's a reason she married a chef.
I thought it was the other way around. Wasn't it the advice for women was always the way to a man's heart was through his stomach?
Yeah, I guess this played out in reverse.
Well,
she
I mean,
doesn't.
there is
She doesn't
this thing,
cook
though,
much,
like-
so that's probably why she ended up marrying a chef.
Like, for me, I cook a lot of very specific things, like a lot of Cajun stuff, but, like, my wife does a lot of, like, home cooking style, old country type food that I can't make. Like, she's got something in the crock pot right now, and we've been talking about food this whole time. I'm getting hungry.
There you go.
So with my wife, she's the baker. Like I can't. Baking is like science, right? You gotta like do science to do baking right, and so she's all into that. But I can cook food because I can like, oh, even if it's not exactly what I was doing, it came out good. This is good. I'm cooking it over. I'm going out to the grill and I'm just gonna, cook the meat so it's done medium and it'll be delicious because that's just always delicious.
And with that in mind, I think
definitely enjoy a little bit more of the freewheeling freedom on the savory aspect of things that you have that you don't get in the pastry world.
Absolutely. And also, I've got a thought for maybe how we can close this too, because this is something that's kind of like one of our in-group secrets, but I think we can share with the world. Can you talk to us finally just about how to do the reverse sear?
All right. So there's a few different ways you can do it. The concept is you want to start the steak on low, slow heat and bring it up to the internal temperature you want and finish with a very hard sear. You can do that indoors in an oven and then a cast iron on the stove, or you can do it outside on a fire in your charcoal grill or smoker or whatever. But yeah, the concept is, so like if you're doing it inside, if I'm doing it in my oven and finishing on my cast iron, I'm setting my oven to like 250 degrees, 220 degrees, something like that. And I'll get my steak seasoned up well in advance. I always want to season the meats well in advance so that it has time to kind of almost, for lack of a better term, dry brine, which allows all the salt to absorb. Salt and water find equilibrium, so the salt enters the meat, the excess moisture comes out, and then we'll kind of restabilize, so you give it enough time, a few hours at least. Then I'll let the steaks sit out on the counter for a few hours. I want to make sure that they're thoroughly room temperature. Nothing bad's going to happen to them. Everyone's afraid of like, oh, will they get bad? Or they can sit out. It's okay. So that's before the cook even starts. It does take a little bit of planning if you want to do it the best way, in my opinion. So yeah, season them, let them sit seasoned for a few hours in the fridge. Again, on a wire rack, so it has some air circulation. So it's not sitting in the pool of liquid that it eventually osmoses with.
So yeah, just get it good and dry, right?
Good and dry and well seasoned. Bring it out, let it sit, get it to room temperature. Get it in the oven. Once it's at room temperature, get it in the oven. And like I said, 215, 220, 225. You can go as high as 250. That's fine. But you want to slowly warm up your steak, essentially. And if you're going for like a medium rare, pull it out somewhere between 115 degrees and 120 degrees. So if you temp the steak, that's what you want it at in the middle, is between 115 and 120. Once you hit that, you want to get your cast iron just like, ripping hot. And you finish with a sear. You're literally going to sear it in like 30-second to 1 minute intervals on each side, kind of going back and forth until you got a nice crust on it. And I'll usually throw some aromatics in the pan, some sprig of thyme or rosemary, garlic cloves, so that the essential oils in those are now starting to marry with the fat that you're putting in the pan. So it's going to flavor the steak that way. You see a lot of people will baste the steak as it's searing. And then that last 30-second interval, I'm throwing a couple knobs of fresh butter in, just to kind of round it out. And you can pretty much eat it right away. You don't have to really rest that steak as much, because the internal temperature has been brought up nice and slow. You aren't really building a whole lot of pressure in the meat. So when you cut it, it's not going to start bleeding out everywhere. It's the same concept out on a grill. You want to do the same steps leading up to the or even over a fire. You want to do the same steps leading up to it, but you don't want to put it over direct heat. You keep it on indirect heat as low and slow as you possibly can.
So get it dry, warm it up, and then just fast.
Yep. Yeah. You're basically like slow cooking internally, and then you're getting the crust at the very end. And
now I'm really hungry.
What what that accomplishes is that, like I said, you're going to get a more tender, juicier steak, and you're not going to have that like weird gray zone between the crust and the center, where it's like that gray kind of fully cooked meat, and then it starts to gradually get to medium rare towards that like strip of medium rare in the middle. It's going to be pretty much medium rare from crust to crust. You get a much more even doneness.
Beautiful. I'll tell you what, I think we have found some Ascendant art today.
We all need to go make steaks now.
Yes.
I have done my job then. If you walk
honestly,
away from this wanting to make steak, I'm a happy guy.
I've got a couple steaks that I've got marinating over the course of a couple days before I grill them. So I'm not ready yet, but I'm going to be extra ready when they're good.
Nice.
We will go and partake in this Ascendant art indeed. All right, well, gentlemen, it's been a good one, and we will come back together again next week. And again, Devito, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks.
A fun conversation.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on Food Wars.
Yeah, I'll have to find some time to check it out.
That's gonna be our follow-up.
I'll let you know all of the fact and fiction.
That's what we're all about.
There we go. Have a good night, gentlemen.
Thanks.